Evening. Tonight we will be talking about the music and fashion of this past decade. The 1920s fashion has been described as stylish and functional. They were known as beautiful clothes that allowed women to move. Women's dresses have had a dramatic change. The flapper dress has become a popular dress to go out in. Women's hemlines rose to the knee, then more recently even above the knee. The style of dress allowed women to move without feeling restricted. The flapper dress is best paired with sparkly jewelry and the famous bob cut. The bob cut was also a big change in this decade. Women's hair is no longer long and pulled back like it was in the past. Now their hair is mostly short and worn by young women. In the early 20s, the conservative suit was the most popular men's suit style. Marked by its tightly fitted jacket, high-pinched waist, and narrow shoulder, the suit cut a narrow silhouette. In 1924, the men's look changed. They veered away from the thin-cut pinched look and into what has been called the jazz suit. For formal wear, most men have been wearing the tuxedo with all the elements: the jacket, vest, and pants made from all different materials. Jazz music has been most popular of this decade. This decade has also been known as the Jazz Age. Louis Armstrong and King Oliver have been most known in jazz music. King Oliver has been known as the jazz leader. Oliver's big hit of this decade is called the Diaper Mouth Blues. Louis Armstrong has been the most famous musician of this decade. Armstrong played with King Oliver's band in the early 1920s. Now he has moved on to a highly successful solo career, playing around the world with almost every famous jazz musician. Armstrong has experimented with many different music styles, including Hawaiian, gospel, bluegrass, and other popular music of this century. Another famous musician of this decade is Leon Bix Bieberbeck. Leon's style is a lot softer and more relaxed than Louis' style. His style has been described as a bullet hitting a wind chime.
I'm here today with former outfielder of the New York Yankees, Babe Ruth. How have you been, Mr. Ruth?
I'm great. It is great being on such a great team. We try our hardest and everyone works hard. It's a great experience.
Do you see yourself still playing baseball while it is a good experience for you?
Maybe. I don't think about it often. I just go with what's happening and practice with my team, and I couldn't be happier.
That's great to know. Do you ever think about where it could be going ever since you started in 1914 for the Baltimore Orioles, then moved on to the Red Sox, and moved to the New York Yankees finally?
No. I just love the sport and love playing it. All the teams that have had me have been great.
Do you think the Yankees helped you win the American League MVP in 1923?
Yes, of course, I did. They helped me every step of the way. I love my team.
That is great to hear, Mr. Ruth. I also heard you just got married once again this past year.
Yes, to Claire Hodgson. I'm very happy.
That's great. Well, it was nice having you here, Mr. Ruth. Always a great time.
No problem. My pleasure.
Are your kids looking for a tasty way to start their day? Then go to the market and buy Kellogg's Rice Krispies right now. Kellogg's Rice Krispies are packed with nutrients and essential vitamins to help your kids conquer their day. For a bargain price of $1.25, you get a full box of our delicious cereal. Snap, crackle, and pop on down to the market today and buy Kellogg's Rice Krispies.
Today I will be discussing one of the most famous crime stories, Lady in the Ashes. Mrs. Alice Arsenault, owner of the lodging house on Columbus Avenue in Boston, was last seen alive December 25, 1919. On May 12, 1920, her body was discovered under a pile of ashes in the basement of her house. Paul Pappas, who was a resident in the lodging house at the time, had an argument with Mrs. Arsenault on the night of her disappearance. Pappas made up the story that Mrs. Arsenault left her husband and was hiding in Springfield, Massachusetts. Pappas then forced legal documents to sell her house for $800. He fled the States and was captured September 1921 in Montreal, Canada. The discovery of her body was by the new owners of the property. Her body was covered in stab wounds and lay under a large amount of ashes in her basement. The new owners sent out for the ashes to be cleaned out, and the body was then discovered. The murder then became known as the Lady in the Ashes case. Pappas remarried while he was in Montreal, Canada, and gave his new wife Mrs. Arsenault's ring. It was believed the two knew each other 15 months before the murder. He was finally found guilty June 15, 1922, and then became executed in the electric chair in late June, early July of 1923. That's all for the crime story. Now to the sports. There have been many sports stars that have stood out in the past few years, some which you may know. The biggest name out there right now is George Herman Ruth Jr., also known as Babe Ruth, who is a major sports star in baseball. In 1920, Babe Ruth became a New York Yankee and transitioned to a full-time outfielder. He was dominating in baseball, rewriting record books by his amazing hitting records. In 1920, he hit 54 home runs. However, Babe Ruth continued increasing his home run numbers. In 1921, he hit 59 home runs and in total hit 177 runs. In 1923, Babe Ruth was named Player of the Year. In 1927, he hit 60 home runs, a record that would stand for almost 34 years. He also led his team to the championships. This is one of the best records ever in baseball history. We hope to see what else he can do with his baseball career in the future.
Economic news. In late October 1929, the most devastating stock market crash began. It led many people out of jobs and searching for the money they have lost. Before this, while the American city prospered, vast emigration from rural areas continued to neglect the U.S. agriculture industry and created widespread financial despair among American farmers throughout the decade. Before this happened, many businesses boomed, and everyone was having a grand old time, making money and spending money like nothing was to it. On the political side of things, we've had 3 presidents in the last decade. In 1920, we elected Warren J. Harding, 1924, Calvin Coolidge, and in 1928, our current president, Herbert C. Hoover. Now, Calvin Coolidge really helped out the country in many ways. In some ways, some people don't think he did. He was a very quiet president and didn't talk very much at all. He became president after President Harding died of a heart attack on a trip to Alaska. Harding's administration had been full of corruption and scandal. Fortunately, Coolidge had not been a part of this corruption and immediately cleaned house. He fired corruption and inept officials and hired new reliable staffers. But during the beloved 20s, lots of things that were good did happen. In 1920, the 19th Amendment for women's right to vote was passed. In 1922, 50,000 people were affected during the lower Louisiana floods. In 1923, King Tut's tomb was discovered and opened by Howard Carter. In 1924, the first Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade was held on November 27th, and Ellis Island closes as an immigration entry point. Also in that year, the Indian Citizenship Act confers citizenship on all Native Americans born within the U.S. In 1925, the Butler Act, which prohibits evolution from being taught in public schools, was passed in Tennessee. In 1926, the Ford Motor Company announces the creation of a 40-hour work week for factory workers. In 1927, the Holland Tunnel connecting New York City and Jersey was made, and an earthquake measuring 8.6 struck China, killing 200,000. A Great Mississippi Flood affected 700,000 people. In 1928, Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin. And in 1929, at the end, after the time of excess in all areas, the stock market crashed on Black Thursday.